If you're gaming on a system with 4 gigabytes of RAM, you might think you're limited to less demanding games, but that's far from true. There are plenty of amazing titles that offer rich experiences without taxing your hardware. Whether you enjoy strategy, action, puzzle solving, or exploration, there's something for everyone. In this list, we've compiled the top 10 video games that run smoothly on systems with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Number 10. Just Cause 2. Just Cause 2 has a bit of a Saints Row bizarre feeling to it, although it is a little more serious. Just Cause 2 has a fairly basic storyline, one which is designed to give you some structure without feeling too limiting. You can easily explore the open world at your own pace, and only dip into the main storyline when you want to. I do find that the gameplay becomes a little repetitive after 10 to 15 hours, but maybe that's just me. Overall, Just Cause 2 is a fun and action-packed game, with fairly good 3D graphics, especially since they can run on a PC with just 2 gigabytes of RAM. Number 9. Mortal Kombat Complete Edition. This fun fighting game was released in 2011, and it includes a number of awesome fighters, including Freddy Krueger, Johnny Cage, Baraka, Cyber Sub-Zero, and others. This game supports single-player matches, along with playing with friends in 1v1 matches, or watching other players in an online King of the Hill mode. Dedicated players will want to purchase the Mortal Kombat Fight Stick Pad, although this is not required for casual gameplay. Mortal Kombat runs really well in a 4 gigabyte system, and it doesn't require an ultra-powerful CPU or graphics card either. Number 8. Crysis 3. Crysis 3 was no longer a hardware-melting game, and thankfully nowadays, Crysis 3 seems like an easy-to-run game. It only requires 3 gigabytes of RAM. If your system is able to run Crysis 3, you should definitely check them out because these are really awesome shooter games with some amazing graphics. You don't need to play Crysis 1 or 2 before playing Crysis 3, although I would recommend checking out Crysis 1 too, because it was such a groundbreaking game at the time. Reviews of Crysis 2 are a little mixed due to its linear gameplay, but it's still a pretty good game. Number 7. Battlefield 3. Battlefield 3 brought back fighter jets and 64-player multiplayer matches that were absent from the Bad Company series. It's hard to explain, but online matches with 64 other players and fighter jets flying overhead feel a lot more real and immersive, probably because they are so fast-paced and there are enemies everywhere. I would say that if you want a more real army feel, you will prefer Battlefield 3 to Battlefield Bad Company. In terms of the system specs, you only need 2 gigabytes of RAM, so anything more is a bonus really. Basically, BF3 should run fairly smoothly if you have 4 gigabytes of RAM, although naturally the CPU and GPU matters too, with a minimum of 512 megabytes of VRAM being required. Number 6. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. The plot is similar to the other games in the series. There is an ongoing battle between the Assassins and the Templars. This particular game centers around a Welsh pirate who uncovers hidden secrets that are wanted by both the Assassins and the Templars. The nice thing about Assassin's Creed games is that, while stealth is always preferred, you can switch to mindless violence if you need to. Or simply want to. You have a number of fun weapons and takedowns at your disposal for when stealth and avoidance aren't possible. This open-world game has a fun and interesting storyline and some great game mechanics. The fact that it only requires 2 gigabytes of RAM is a nice bonus too. Number 5. Saints Row 4. This is a bizarre action-adventure game which is actually more of a shoot-'em-up. While there is some storyline to follow, with a game world that allows some exploration, there are so many enemies to shoot that the game quickly descends into a shooter. This 3D AAA game from 2013 still has pretty good graphics a decade later, but it runs fairly well from most 4 gigabyte systems. It is better if your graphics card has at least 1 gigabyte of VRAM, although you might be able to get by with a slightly less powerful GPU. Number 4. Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 is another Valve classic, And it's a shooter game that feels like a survival horror game at times. But don't worry, it's not scary. I played it when I was still a kid, and I was never genuinely frightened. Plus, it helps that HL2 has very low hardware requirements. 4 gigabytes of RAM will be more than enough to play this game and keep RAM-heavy programs like Chrome open. The graphics still feel fairly modern considering this is a 2004 game. Yes, you're not going to get 4K, A Plague Tale, Requiem level of graphics out of HL2, but it will feel fairly modern and trendy to play, despite being almost 2 decades old. Number 3. The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings. If you've ever watched the Netflix series, you may have been inspired to check out the Witcher's game series. Unfortunately, while The Witcher 3 is too demanding for a 4 gigabyte system, The Witcher 2 works really well with just 4 gigabytes. This game still looks pretty good, and the fact that it runs with just 2 gigabytes of RAM is neat too. You can often pick up the game for $10 to $15 in a sale, too, which is a great deal considering that it's an awesome game. Number 2. Far Cry 3. This was another game that I loved when it was first released. Far Cry 3 was actually my first experience of the Far Cry series. This open-world shooter game allows you to drive, fly, shoot, and just generally have a good time. Oh, you start the game dumped on a random island where the only rules are to fight and to try avoiding the gangs that informally run the island. You will probably spend 15 to 30 hours playing the main story, depending on whether you go through it quickly or try and complete many of the side objectives. Number 1. Mafia 2. Mafia 2 is a popular, big-budget game from 2K Czech, and it was released on all consoles platforms back in 2010. This highly rated game has a fairly interesting storyline and lots of good fighting gun game mechanics. Mafia 2 therefore feels like a genuine and close-to-action shooter, and it's a lot of fun. The fact that it can run on systems with just 1.5 gigabytes of RAM is nice too, because you don't have to worry about whether your 4 gigabytes computer will run this smoothly. These games provide a variety of genres and experiences, all optimized to run smoothly on systems with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Whether you're into casual or competitive gaming, these titles offer engaging gameplay without overwhelming your computer's resources.